Hello, kings, queens, and monarchs of every element. I'm RJ the Jank Monarch, and last week, the entire Yugi sphere was captivated by one piece of discourse. What makes a bad deck? There were a lot of conversations about it, a lot of not-so conversations about it, and a lot of people weighing in with very strong opinions and surprisingly strong feelings on the subject. I even got my 2 cents in a reasonable and totally non-aggressive format, but today I want to elaborate on my ideas around what makes a bad deck and what it says about our feelings about success as a whole in Yu-Gi-Oh! As I alluded to just now, in order to understand what makes a deck good or bad, we have to find a definition for success. After all, something is good if it brings you success, and it's bad if it doesn't. I think that's a pretty fair framework in the world of competitive game. Now, this is an interesting thing when it comes to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community and our culture, in that we seem to bring a lot of different definitions of success to the table functionally when it comes to actually feeling successful and expressing feelings of success, but not really when it comes to how we discuss success. When people talk about feeling achieved or happy with what they've done, there are a lot of ways that you see that happening. Looking around at my social media, it seems like there are a lot of different results that cause people to feel achievement, that cause people to be happy with their time playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, that cause people to feel successful. When I came back to the game after 5 years and attended a locals for the first time in most of a decade at the Age of Overlord sneak preview, I was happy with an X2 finish, where I met a lot of people, learned a lot about the deck I was playing, and got to mess around and have some weird games. That was a successful day to me. I was raving about that on Twitter, and I've seen a lot of people feel similarly. There are duelists who will be happy to win a locals, that'll be really proud of what they've done. Topping a regionals is a big mark of success for a lot of competitive players. Regionals are the primary place that a lot of us get to test our mettle on the battlefield. But if you ask a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, success only comes with winning at the highest level of competition possible. The only really successful Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are the people who have won YCSs, and even within that group, people who have won multiple. Or if you ask one prominent Yu-Gi-Oh! Player within the Twitter community if you've won a YCS that's smaller than most regionals. This mindset, quite frankly, sucks. Kazuki Takahashi didn't make Yu-Gi-Oh! So you could make Daddy Tate proud by being the strongest boy on the playground. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was designed to be a story and game about being empowered in a setting other than those that our society traditionally wants from us. It's about setting goals and self-improvement. It's about finding connection with other players, finding friendship in rivalry. If you only view success in Yu-Gi-Oh! As being at the top of the pile, as this zero-sum game of I win and you lose, you're entirely missing the point of the game's existence. That doesn't mean you can't set lofty goals and try to achieve great things. It's a noble goal to try and win a YCS. It's a great thing to try and find how you can become better, build better decks, find more avenues through which you can win the game. That's cool. That's sick. I'm glad for anybody who can do that. But it's important to recognize that only you can define what success in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is for you. Whatever it is that you want to achieve, that's what success looks like. That could be anything from winning worlds to having a positive record at your locals with a brew you just made up. If I were to think about the folks who I consider the top players in terms of their success in Yu-Gi-Oh!, I'd start with Jesse Cotton. Not only is he one of the best players in terms of event tops, but he's also a phenomenal teacher and has been a pillar of the community. He's somebody that teaches us how to be great at the game, not just by having accolades to his name. I'd also say Keegan from E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an extremely successful player. The man resurrected a format from the dead and made it the most popular way to play the TCG since, well, the TCG. Along with those two, I'd put Abyss Yu-Gi-Oh! And Nick Gibson, my old friend from back in my Dice Age Games days. Those two are people who were constantly brewing new things and were always achieving things you wouldn't expect to be possible with the decks that they put together. Both Nick and Abyss are known for being terrors at their locals because they put together decks with a very clear goal in mind and are extremely good at achieving that. They see potential in cards that others don't. This might not be landing them at the top tables at Nats, but they're flexing their creative and competitive brains in mind-blowing ways and seeing shocking win rates as a result. Winning locals with Chaz Tira week after week is a pretty impressive accomplishment in my mind. So with that definition of success in mind, the conversation about good and bad decks becomes very interesting very quickly. If success is achieving the goal you set yourself to, then a good deck is a deck that achieves your goals. That throws into question a lot of things. For example, Kashtira before Arise Heart was banned was a great way to top a regionals or win a YCS. But if your goal was to do something creative or have a fun day at locals, Kashtira before Arise Heart was banned was a terrible deck. This is why the deck that seemed to be at the center of the most discord on X, I almost called it the thing, on Twitter was so contentious. Ursarctic is not a deck that is going to win you a YCS right now. But if you see winning locals multiple times in a row or topping a regional as being successful, sure, Ursarctic could be a perfectly good deck. This is why you'll get a lot of pushback from casual players if you say that their pet deck is bad. Their definition of success is different from the one that you're using. To a casual player, doing well at a small event with their favorite deck is successful. There are still some decks within that framework that probably aren't going to be good. If you wanted to get your Nats invite with Crash Bugs, you're probably not going to be successful. It's probably a bad deck. But even within the vast ocean of untiered decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, there are a lot of decks that somebody might consider good. Even if you're changing your conversation from the very clearly subjective good and bad to the somewhat less subjective seeming strong or weak, you're still not going to be able to create a successful binary between something that is strong and something that is weak. You wouldn't call Usain Bolt a weak person because he can't compete with professional weightlifters. There are people who are strong, there are people who are stronger, and not everybody who isn't the strongest is weak. The same goes for Yu-Gi-Oh! The definition of what is strong and what is not strong is going to be flexible. This is why tier lists are such a useful tool when it comes to discussing decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can set the parameters for your tier list and then rank decks against each other based on your opinions on those decks' strengths under those categories. You can make a tier list that is the standard competitive tier list. These are the decks that are in the entire field of decks, the ones that are most likely to win you any given event. A lot of people also constrain their tier lists in other ways. Their budget tier list, their rogue tier list. I think ranking decks against each other is a perfectly valuable way to discuss things in Yu-Gi-Oh! Whereas trying to call things good and bad and trying to create some kind of objective framework around those isn't helpful and just speaks to a mindset that hurts the game and hurts the community. And that's just not a useful conversation or mindset for us to have as a community, rather than comparing cards and decks against each other in particular contexts for particular purposes, which allows us to actually evaluate whether or not we want to play them. It just becomes a proxy for whether or not we think a player is good or bad or valuable within the community. And that ain't what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is about. You should define your success by what makes you happy, what makes you feel accomplished, what makes it so that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a more worthwhile thing for you to do with your time than something else. So go out there and play your Unchained, your Rescue Ace, your Ogdoadics, your Ursarctics, whatever it is that's going to achieve your reason for playing this game. And stop worrying about whether or not a deck is good or bad. Focus on your goals, your self-improvement, and how you're going to get there. And maybe think about supporting others in their journeys as well. Anyway, go forward in humble confidence, my friends, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.